When I did the handbook to scripture, I created it in such a way that it would be 365 days. And so there's over 900 chapters, so about a third of the Bible was selected. My rules, one of the rules was that every book of the Bible has to be represented at least with one chapter. So Leviticus got a chapter, got one chapter, chapter 16, the life is in the blood. All the books of the Bible had to be represented. That includes Obadiah. And so, but on the other hand, with Esther, I put in 9 out of the 10 chapters, even though the story doesn't carry us that for each chapter, because of the importance of the narrative structure. This is, again, more like a modern mystery, a kind of a Hitchcock story, a story that has plot twists and ironies and suspense if you really see it together. And if it was really well crafted and done today, possibly in a different setting, doesn't have to be so obviously the book of Esther, but the stories are powerful and profound. But that's why I did that. The upshot, however, is that by teaching, I'm discovering that I have to fill in things because it only teaches me so much, as you're about to see. You have the story about Esther and about Haman, and about Haman being invited to the banquet, and Esther wants to confront Haman with the plot to destroy the Jews. And that's pretty much it. But we're going to go through that together. But I have some things I want to pull out for you that I think will be relevant for us, that because God's word is perpetually relevant. You see, if you want to be relevant, the stupidest thing you can do is try to adapt the Bible to today's culture. That's when woke theology invades the church. They consign themselves to perpetual irrelevance because they become a bubble on the back of culture. They're always trying to be current, but they're always a bubble, always consigned to the bin of perpetual irrelevance. Way back when I was working with Chuck Colson in around 2004 and following for a number of years, now it's way back, it's hard to believe, but I did about 10 years of the Centurion, and they brought people to that study. And I remember one of the things he described was that theologians, because it always starts with the philosophers, and then the artists pick up on what's happening in the culture, and then the next ones to pick it up are the musicians, and then there's the general culture, playwrights and so forth, now would be film. And the last ones to catch on are the theologians. They were all big on process theology, when process philosophy had already been dumped, but they were trying desperately to be current. So Colson used the metaphor, for me, these people are sporting theological bell-bottoms. You see, they're wearing theological bell-bottoms or Nehru jackets to make it even worse. You remember the Nehru jackets or the leisure suits? I mean, my father had a lime green leisure suit. It was not pretty to see. But the point is, that's what people are like today. They consign themselves to the bin of total irrelevance by trying to adapt the Bible to make it more culturally relevant. You want this thing to be relevant, then teach it in its power, and it's going to always be counterculture. It's always contra mundum, against the world. The scriptures have always been so. This isn't something people would have made up or could have made up. It's completely different. And the way you convey this message is to be faithful to the message and convey it in ways that adapt only in the way you may present it or communicate that. I use visual means and things of that sort, but don't change the message itself and try to play games with that and let political correctness then overwhelm what the scriptures clearly teach about the differences between men and women and the reality of the home and what's involved there. And it gives dignity to women, but at the same time shows that there's a difference, and you want to celebrate that difference because actually that's called diversity. And the odd irony is that people want to celebrate diversity by eliminating what they eliminate the basis for diversity, which is difference. Have you noticed this? That is to say, they don't want to talk about differences between men and women in other situations here, because that would be to make them not the same. But then what happens is you don't have any basis for diversity, because if they're all the same, then there's no diversity. I don't know if you've thought that one through yet. But diversity means difference, but we don't want people to be different. You work that one out. It's a self-defeating proposition. the fact is that what makes life relevant is starting with what the scriptures teach and then letting that affect our world. And that's really why we had the greatest period, the efflorescence of the greatest culture in many ways the world had ever known was accomplished because of a Christian theistic consensus from about the 6th century AD to about the 16th century AD. And after that, the so-called Enlightenment actually endarkened people and moved them away from the light. And then gradually the cultural consensus was now against theism. In fact, it was positive to be a believer up to about 1994. Then from about 1994 to about 2014, it became a neutral thing. Starting around 2014, it's now a negative thing to be a believer in Christ, you see, and it's going to go more and more that way. So I'm saying that this is a book that speaks of timeless truth for all times. And though it was written so many years ago, yet the principles are the same. Why? Cultures may change, but people don't. People are bearers of the Imago Dei. And because they're bearers of that image of God, they are, in fact, spiritual beings. They can't help it. You're wired that way. And even the atheist is God-haunted because they're meaning-haunted, because they cannot eradicate the Imago Dei, because he's put eternity in their hearts, so they cannot eradicate eternity. So at the same time, it speaks for these issues, and I'm going to pull out some themes from this text that relate to us very much today and to try to apply it. So it's the application of that and our understanding of what we're looking at. So we're going to be going to our text and going to go to the end of chapter 4. A couple weeks ago, we were in chapter 4, and we learned about the plot of Haman to destroy the Jews. And his outrage against Mordecai became a more general outrage against the Jews, which is what's been happening in our time as well. A growing anti-Semitism in our time has got to be supernaturally driven. It's more than just normal for lots of reasons. But here you have the idiocy that with identity politics, that if a people are presumably oppressed, they can do no wrong. So you have moral monsters who are being celebrated in the university, and people are paying huge amounts of money to have their children educated by the Philistines into sublime is idiocy. You just can't pick this up on your own. And in fact, when someone comes up with a particularly dumb statement, a friend of mine says, "What graduate school did you go to?" Because you can't get this even from college. There's some things are so stupid you have to have only gone through graduate school to pick up this stuff. It's so countercultural. So people are living in a way that's far more anemic and rather opposed to a number of things. They are no longer basing their ideas on reason, number one, evidence, number two, let alone three, common sense. And it's short in supply. The wisdom supply is diminished, and the source of wisdom is the fountainhead of all wisdom. And then only by bowing to him do we find that true. But when that wonderful 1,000 years approximately of a theistic consensus took place, you saw the world's greatest architecture, music, art, literature, poetry, and eleemosynary institutions. The creation of the university was a Christian product, and the overcoming of slavery, which happened for many years until it was reintroduced later in with the discovery of the West. But slavery had been done away with. Hospitals, orphanages, all these things which didn't exist before, a product of a Christian vision. It was the greatest flourishing ever known. And then it began to decline, and with a movement toward deism, they then transitioned from a theism to a naturalism. That's the prominent view. So we live in a time where people are not really attuned to those things, but we also live in a time when we can see the relevance of these scriptures and to apply them to our day, and understand what's happening. So let's go back to our text now. So he set out to this city square and so forth, and there was his outrage against Mordecai, who would not bow down to him. And so he then decides he has a plot to pay money and have them go to all the 127 satraps, the provinces, and destroy the Jews. And he cast lots called Pur, hence the word Purim later on, because he selects a time way in the future, and it turns out that it'll be on Passover, not an accident, that would be that when this would occur. And so Esther, when Mordecai, Esther's really the one who raised her, it's her uncle, but he raised her as like a daughter, and he told her, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise to the Jews from another place." It's the closest he gets to talking about God. The book never mentions the name of God, but his providential care is all throughout the book. You can see the evidences of this. All these twists and circumstances are all working together in a context that actually leads to God's purposes being fulfilled. By the way, your life is like that as well. A lot of things that you hate and don't like at all, you actually work together, because if all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose, I need to be grateful for that and to see what that looks like in my life. But anyway, it goes on to say, if you remain silent this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. You and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? And so I often use the word such a time as this as a signature, because this is the time in which we are now embedded in. What greater time? We, I think, live on the edge of history. It's the most incredible time to see all these things taking place in our own period of time, unreal and unprecedented. So she asked for an assembly to fast and don't eat or drink for 3 days, day and night. And they fasted. We talked about fasting 2 weeks ago, and she said, I'm going to do which is not according to the law, because if she goes before him and he does not raise the golden scepter, she will be taken out and killed. So if I perish, I perished. And so she went away and did just as he told him. And it came about on the third day. And that's interesting, because 3 days and 3 nights was the phrase that was used, and yet on the third day. The Jews had an idiom. The Hebrew idiom was 3 days and 3 nights, but actually meant part of the first day, all of the second day, and on part of the third day. And this is why on the third day. You see why that is? By the way, that accounts for why it would be he'd be in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. Remember that idea? It was part of Friday. It was all of Saturday. It was part of Sunday. So that works for the weekend, for the crucifixion of Christ on a Friday. But it came about on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court. Now, she had not been invited by the king. He hadn't been summoned for 30 days. So there was no assurance. And it was a matter of the guy's mood. If he was having dyspepsia, if it was something wrong, he just was in a bad mood, people's lives would come and go on the basis of his whims. So she stood in the inner court in front of the king's rooms. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. When the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight. And the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So this is the point where she was given that favor in the king's sight. Remember, lots of prayer had gone into it. This is a big meeting. It was a very important thing. She's going to be making a request to him for the first time. He came near, touched the top of the scepter. Then the king said to her, "What is troubling you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it will be given to you." He was obviously in a good mood, a receptive mode. She says, "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I prepared for him." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that we may do as Esther desires." So the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So it was all ready to go. And they drank their wine at the banquet. And the king said to Esther, this is the second time, it's going to be offering it a third time later, "What's your position? For it shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it will be done." Again, a pretty big deal. So Esther replied, "My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and do what I request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says." So I want you to come to an event in which I'm going to now ask you, give you my request. So prepare for that. Now, Haman is very pleased with himself because he thinks, good grief, I'm the only one who was invited to this deal. So he becomes a complete social bore. You see what I mean? And you know what I'm talking about. Me. There's a Brian Regan video that's called I Walked on the Moon. I wish I could show it to you. I'm not allowed to, but if I could show it to you, but it's a thing when he talks about that. I guess I can't even play the soundtrack, can I? Darn it. It's fabulous. But it's at the end of it. And basically, there's this guy about him, and he does these fabulous gestures about me, and when I went over to Rome, and then I was over here in Bangkok, and then over here, and blah, 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 blah. And this other guy is sitting there. What would it be like if you were one of the astronauts who walked on the moon? You're just eating, your canopies and just enjoying yourself, letting this guy blabber on about this, all his accomplishments, all his travels, all his peregrinations. And then you're just quietly waiting for your moment. And then after he's through with, I walked on the moon. You're going to trump him every time. It's a guaranteed trump. You see, I walked on the moon. You see, and yeah. And he was talking about Italy and so forth. Yeah, but we were in the Sea of Tranquility riding around, not just an ordinary sea. We were in the moon riding around, and there's no speed limits here. So he goes into this funny thing about that. And it would be the ultimate story. It'd be like talking about some flood that you were in, and then Noah's in the room. You see, you get the idea. So listen to this guy. He went out that day glad and pleased of heart, as it tells us. And when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. He's such a petty man. You can't stand the fact that this man is not bowing and scraping in front of him because his sense of dignity is so high. Haman controlled himself, however, and he went to his house and sent for his friends and his wife, Zeresh. Then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches and the number of his sons, and every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come to the king to the banquet which he had prepared. And tomorrow also I'm invited by her with the king. He has no clue that he's about to go into the slaughter. But yet all of this, then he goes on to say, even with his friends after blabbering and boasting, yet all of this does not satisfy me. Every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, that's the one enemy of his joy, as he says. So Zeresh's wife, very practical woman, all his friends said, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, 75 feet high. In the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. There it is. Pretty quick gallows work, though, because he had to have him ready in the morning and all that. You've heard that expression? He was hoisted on his own petard, hung up. He's setting up his own And I think it won't harm me to know that he is hung on it himself. I think you already know the story where it's coming. But the drama, if you had not seen this story before, is delicious. And Hitchcock would have, I think, done a wonderful job in pulling out the suspense, the plot twists, the ironies, and so forth. But what comes to my mind is the obvious, egregious egocentricity of a man like this. But really, in one very real way, we all can be vulnerable. We may be more subtle in our approaches, maybe not the blabbermouth and the boaster as this guy was, but nevertheless, it can still be. It's amazing how we are more concerned about people hearing us than about us hearing them. This is why James 1, when we were looking at it together, let everyone be what? Quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man, the wrath of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Notice he said, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. If I applied that verse alone, again, remember the phrase, you've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use them proportionately. Suppose if you began to be a listener and actually, instead of having to talk about yourself, concern yourself with the other person, because you see, effective listening really requires other-centeredness at the end of the day. What happened here? I hit my Bible by mistake. I'm up to Joshua. This is my 4th time through. Maybe I was supposed to announce that. I'm still encouraging you, use any version, whether it's the U version or not, and listen to the Bible on basically, like, instead of books on tape, try that for a month and see if that doesn't really isn't an effective thing. I found that there's no substitute for it, and it's just written. I keep going through it, and I'm finding it. You know what's going to happen, but it's lovely to hear it in a different translation and a different voice and a different thing. And then the Spirit of God uses that book and makes it alive in different ways every time you go through it. But here's what came to my mind when I was considering this, and we're going to be talking about this whole idea. You remember we've talked about humility before. I've shown you this before. Humility, and the irony of humility is sometimes our humility can cry out for recognition. You've known that, you see, and this guy, I'm humble and proud of it. You see, when you're, have you ever seen a frog with teeth in it? I'm humble and proud of it. And then there's my famous trilogy that I've just come up with here. It's on the table back there. So when you go out there, my 3 books, Pride and How I Overcame It is volume 1.
Let's see.
It's my humility trilogy, you see. The 2nd volume there is Humility and How I Attained It. And then the 3rd volume is How You Too Can Be Just Like Me. So hurry and buy that set. But there are some people who, if you were to talk with them, you'd think that they were touting this thing. There's some people who are so filled with themselves that if they were to write an autobiography, you know what they would call it? 10 Great People Who've Known Me. It's a funny concept. But this business of pride and humility, the key to humility, as I've come to discover it, is a text in 2 Corinthians 4:7. Let me summon that up for you because it's this important for you. Rather, 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 7, which says, "Who regards you as superior? What do you have that you did not receive?" That's a rhetorical question. What your answer should be is nothing. Then the next question is, if you did receive it, then why do you boast as if you hadn't? So my question for you is, what do you have? What do you bring to the table that was not given to you? Now, most men will acknowledge when it comes to their time is in God's hands. Most people will acknowledge that when it comes to talent, that's a gift of God. You weren't around at some primordial cafeteria where you could go and choose the best talents, because you'd have to be smart to know the best talents, which goes on forever down. But rather, you were given these talents because it was gift and grace. The third one is a little bit harder. More men struggle with the idea of wealth. They suppose they made that. You see, so the Bart Simpson prayer. Thank you for doing this. Even though we bought all this, so thanks for nothing. And basically, we did this, and we earned this nonsense. But men will come to the conviction that my might and the power of my wealth, my hands got me this wealth. Don't deceive you. Beware lest you be full of pride and fail to realize, as Deuteronomy 8 tells you, that it is God who gives you the ability to make wealth. And you probably notice there's no direct assurance about about how hard you work and how much you make. There's no direct cause and effect. There is a correlation maybe, but not a causality, because many of the best deals any of us were in this room were involved in were the ones that happened to work for us. We happened to be at the right place at the right time. Often the ones who worked hardest on fell apart. It'd be designed to reveal something to us, that you have to realize even your ability to make wealth was given to you. And who gave you the lifeblood and the breath and the power and the capacity, and even the opportunity to do this. Everything comes from him. So if you come to understand that verse, it's a life changer. It's a game changer, because everything, and I want you to remember this, is gift and grace. Everything is gift and grace. There's not a thing you have, not an ability you've got that wasn't a gift of grace. And by the way, therefore, it's a stewardship, because you're stewarding the resources of another, and you will give an account. What did you do with that? So instead of boasting and bragging, the more, if God gives you wealth, you might say, he blessed me with wealth. Don't be so sure, because he's just increased your accountability. To whom much has been given, much will be required. And most people do not give according to their ability. Very, very, very few believers give according to their ability. The biblical principles in the New Testament, we talk about this in our book on leverage, which is using temporal wealth for eternal gain, or have to do with generosity, have to do with actually proportionate giving and sacrificial giving. And so it's, and giving with a warm hand. It's an amazing thought. So if we are not careful, we'll become arrogant and suppose we achieve this. I think the most important book that I read on this theme is a book by Humility, and you can actually see, here's a PDF you can get on humility on that book. And the chapter that particularly struck me was his chapter on humility in the life of Jesus. And the key to the humility in the life of Jesus, it seems to me, is this understanding that everything comes from him and through him and to him. The Son can do nothing of himself. I can of my own self do nothing. My judgment is just. I don't receive glory from men. I've not come to do my own will. My teaching isn't mine. I've not come to myself. I do nothing of myself. Over and over again, he says it comes from that. The word you hear is my Father's word. Wouldn't that be a great way to live? For us to realize this day, you can't do anything, but he can do anything through you. And allowing him to do that through you is the way to do it. So the key to humility then is to realize that you are here not because of yourself, but because you are the one who God has loved and pursued. But at the end, you become a vehicle that God uses to his pleasure, and actually brings joy to God when you actually obey him and do what he calls you to do. And it leads to goodness to others as well. Again, what begins with the love of God ends with the love of neighbor, when it becomes not egocentric, but Christocentric. So there's this whole idea of a paradigm shift that one needs to make in this life. And I have a presentation that came to my mind about this matter when we think about this matter of pride and so forth. And it had to do with a paradigm spirituality. Some of you have seen parts of this before, but I again count on collective amnesia, you see, and that's why I can tell jokes in this group, the same one, and you never, it's like I've never heard it before, which is very useful for me. Yeah. But cultivating an eternal versus a temporal perspective, I can't tell you how important this is. Because after I talked in the first chapter of Conform to his image and relational spirituality, loving God completely, which means with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength inside out, loving yourself, that's the key to loving yourself correctly. Because if you allow God to define you, then you have security, significance, and satisfaction. If you allow the world to define you, you don't. And you're going to be trying desperately to use people, possessions, and position to accomplish those things. You can never get. So if the word defines you, then you have security. In fact, when God defines you and tells you that you're his child, that you're his own, that you're loved by him, that you're seated with him in the heavenly places, that all things work together for you, for good. The more secure you are in God's word, guess what happens? The more you're able then to approach relationships out of the overflow and love others compassionately. So if you love yourself correctly, which is to see yourself as God sees you, to choose to believe that what God says, when he says you're a child of the living God, that you are holy and righteous, and that you are seated with me in the heavenly places, and all these other truths, to choose to believe that they're true in spite of your feelings and experiences to the contrary, the more you choose to trust him and say, I'm going to acknowledge that it's so. I'm going to reckon it to be true. I'm going to present myself to you as one alive from the dead. The more you do that, the more you become a person who moves from a temporal to an eternal paradigm, that you begin to treat the things that really matter as such. And the wisdom of treating things according to their true value and holding loose with a loose grip the things of this world, the temporal, and treasuring more and more the things of that are eternal. So it's this perspective that we talk about in this book. And life is a journey, but where are we going? And so we talk about grasping life's brevity and the humility that produces. You don't know what your life will be like tomorrow. It says you're like a vapor. You're just a vapor. It appears for a little while, then vanishes away. But if you grasp who and whose you are, you become an agent of the living God, where you can love others compassionately, and that then enhances the whole process. So the statistics on death are impressive. 1 out of 1 dies, as George Bernard Shaw put it. Don't kid yourself. People, the denial of death, and they're not able to grasp the fact that they themselves are not going to go to some retirement village. There they will live forever. You're not going to live forever. You're going to decline. And the reality is that you're not planning for a realization of how brief this world is, you'll live like a fool. So this paradigm is a way of seeing. And remember, there's just different worldviews. I won't go into all this, but the materialistic worldview is not a pleasurable worldview at all. It leads to a darkness, and people can't live. The non-believer will live better than his worldview because he's got the image of God. Pantheism, that's absorption. So you notice your purpose is survival or self-actualization. All me, mine. The only one that is other-centered is when it comes out of a personal origin, and then relationships become other-centered. You see, the key to the whole thing is not being about you, but about being about others. And because you're allowing God to fulfill you, because life is about unbounded relational life, and it's an incredible thing for us to see what that looks like. So it's a way of seeing, and I contrast the geocentric worldview, which was Ptolemaic, the Egyptian astronomer, which basically had the idea that the Earth was the center of our solar system, and the sun and the planets go around it. And to go from that to a Copernican understanding that the sun is at the center was a revolution, a Copernican revolution, which was radical in its nature. And suddenly there's this whole thing as well. You see the obvious analogy of moving from an egocentric to a Christocentric, a Copernican revolution, where you have to actually every day make a new revolution. Every day you have to put aside the egocentricity and put on Christ, the Christ-likeness. So hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done. It's not about my name or my kingdom or my will. It's about His. And then by doing that, you realize all life is about Him, and you become other-centered. I use these optical illusions. You've seen some of these before. I mean, I love these kinds of things. From one scene from one side looks like this. Scenes from the other side, not so impressive. This is one I like very much because it really does look like it's popping out of that truck. And we like to be fooled, don't we? We like that. This thing, watching that too much, bringing me back on a flashback now from some. On this one, believe it or not, these lines are all parallel. They look like they're not parallel, but they are. I can do some remedial work with you later if you want, and to show you that they really are straight lines. And then the next one here, this is your mind is creating that illusion of an extra dimension. It's not there. Again, your mind doesn't know what to do with this, and it spirals these things around and messes you up. And this is even worse. But yeah. So and then I like this one because you see the difference between if I look at here and put it like there and go like that. So this distance between A and B, that is exactly the same as C and D. You see, it's exactly the same. And I know you're going to find that hard to believe, but it's because your mind is making it look that way because of parallax. And the same, this is even harder to believe, that this width is the same as that. And this length is the same as that. Does not look like that. And I can promise you, if you measured them, you'll see they're exactly the same. Why is it happening? Because your mind is making it do something to fit a certain construct. And so another example would be this green line is the same length as this or green. Let's say green-orange. You almost saw it as orange, didn't you? Mm. So, or this Salvador Dali painting that looks like an island and so forth, but it's actually a human head. You see? So go back to that. Now you see the head. Before you didn't see them, but now you do. You see that, how that works? So your minds are, we love it when people play tricks. This is a fun one because we don't really see upside down very well. So we misunderstand what we're looking at. It looks like he's smiling. He's actually doing that. So if you flip him upside down, you see, so how could it looks like it's smiling because you make him smile, but actually he's doing that. The same thing as this, and this one, this old woman, young woman deal. So with the old woman, you have to see, this is her nose. You see, that's her nose there. That's her eye, you see. And so that's her mouth there. That's the crone. And then with the young woman, then you'd see this is her eyelash here. That's her cheek and her chin, you see. She's looking in that direction, whereas the old woman's looking in that direction. And again, how many of you see the old woman? How many of you see the young woman? How many of you see neither of them? Well, that's how many legs does this elephant have? I'll let you count these legs, and they begin to mess up your mind. Start counting, and you say, something's wrong here that I don't know what. I'm being deceived here. This one is fun because it really does say two words. It says, if you go, you see, J, you jump, you see, and then we see the white space here. So the white space here is L-I-F-E. You see that? Maybe you don't see it yet, but jump life. So again, it's there. And this one I like. If you turn your head to the right, what does it do? Turn your head to the right. The word liar, you see there? Yeah, but so it looks straight up. You don't see the liar. So this is one of my favorites. This old couple, and he's seeing her as she was when she was young. He sees that. She sees him as he was when he was young, and he was courting her. That's her when she was young, when he's singing to her. So you see the idea there, and there's a kind of a nice image, a symbolism. There's a chalice in between them. You see the chalice between them there? You see that? Little things like that. I don't know why she has a tequila bottle as an earring.
Must have been a while now.
It's a Mexican artist though, but it's a lovely idea because what are they doing? They're seeing each other as they were. You see, this is how you are to see your bride, forever young. You see, that's the idea. And the realization that's the best is yet to come. So these competing paradigms are between the temporal and the eternal, between the here and now and the now and future. It's between the tangible and the intangible. It's between the cultural and the biblical. So if you want to have an eternal perspective, you're going to begin to train yourself to treasure the unseen over the seen and the not yet over the now, because that's what Hebrews tells us that faith is. Biblical faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So how do you cultivate this eternal paradigm, this cultural paradigm? Because without that, it'll be about you. And you may not be as egregious and bored as that person that we described, or that Brian Reagan describes, or as Haman was. But you, if you're not careful, will be, you want to make, why did I want them to know that detail about me? You just threw it, you had to tell him about that, didn't you? You see that thing? Why? You want to impress him? So you have to guard your heart and see, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to impress somebody? Or are you trying to be pleasing to Christ? You cannot play to both audiences. You'll either play to an audience of one, or you'll play to an audience of many. And if it's a visible audience, you're going to be consigned to try to play well in front of that audience. And you will be impressed by the plaudits of men and the opinions of people. But if instead you are more impressed with Jesus, then you will be more impressed with his opinion than with others. The interesting and wonderful irony is the more you're concerned about being pleasing to Jesus, the better you will love and serve people without trying to curry their favor. You will no longer be a slave of their opinions and expectations, their agendas. But now you're going to be free to say no, because they may not like it, but God, if I have to discern, not every call for help is a cry from God, is an invitation from God. Then I have to listen to the Spirit, and then I have to discern, what am I here for? How can I serve this person rather than be about me? You see, if I approach relationships out of the overflow of Christ in me, I'll have a sufficiency that I wouldn't have if I were just basing my identity on what people think and how much I have and what I've accomplished. So it comes down to that simplicity, doesn't it, in a very real way? Who's in control of this thing? And who am I seeking to be pleasing? If I make it my agenda to be pleasing to him, that makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? So this is why Paul says, I therefore make it my business. I desire to be pleasing to him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. And so that idea of pleasing him, so this eternal perspective as we go here is to see that in Hebrews, having this mindset of a pilgrim, all these died in faith without receiving the promises. You are not going to receive the promises now. You are a pilgrim, an alien, a stranger, a sojourner, a tenant, a wanderer, an exile. And so if you're a sojourner in this brief land, you realize you're not going to receive the promises because you're not home yet. So don't mistake that. And because you see, let me just jump ahead here, the end of the world, the day in the Lord is going to come like a thief, which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. It's a guarantee. So many men rejoice over a bucket of mammon that God promises to destroy and burn up. And many women are unhappy with what they've been given as a child who is actually an eternal being, who's going to last forever and ever. You see, you never met a mere mortal. So what are your value systems? So, and what are the deepest longings of your heart? And ask yourself this, be honest with yourself. You know, if you think they can't be satisfied by any of the offerings of this transitory world, there's simply not enough time, there's not enough opportunity, there's not enough energy to know what you could possibly do. And it reminds me of a great quote by A.W. Tozer when he says, life is a short and fevered rehearsal for a concert we cannot stay to give. Just when we appear to have attained some proficiency, we're forced to lay our instruments down. You see, it's a great metaphor. And then he goes on to add, there's simply not enough time enough to think, to become, to perform what the constitution of our natures indicates we're capable of. And frankly, if I look at it from this standpoint, there's so much more that I can accomplish that I'm going to be able to do. And I have to come to terms with that, to realize that my potential exceeds my opportunity. And that that does not suggest that there's something that if I have a desire which nothing on this earth could satisfy, perhaps I have been, that desire is for something that he's preparing for a home, for a thing that this earth doesn't have, namely heaven. So now when I realize you're wearing down, you're not going to be able to do all that you wanted to do, your time is running out, instead of being in despair, I seek to use it and live with eternity in mind and live with that sense of urgency in this world, because the time is brief. I want to treasure the precious present, but not with being anxious and wringing my hands. God's given you just enough time to accomplish his purpose, and you're immortal until his will for you is done. And don't think that you know what that purpose is yet. Many of the times, your most important moment, you will not know. Most of your life will be hidden impact. You will not know it. So he goes on to say, we know we can do much more, but we see that that's a hint of home, a hint of heaven, a hint of what's to come instead. Few people attain this wisdom early in life. Midlife crisis often brings our mortality into focus, but we try to put it away again and do stupid things often in those years. A decline of capacity and an increase of responsibility should be driving us to the realization that you don't have the capacity. God gives you the capacity to do what he calls you to do. You can't do it. You'll never fulfill these things and that can be traumatic, or it can be a reminder. Transfer your affections and ambitions to the things above. That's where it will last. So a life well spent, a life well lived, is a life that will be pleasing to God in the end. And so given that idea, seeing that what that looks like is a meaningful thing. And this is why I go on from Tozer, how completely satisfying to turn from our limitations to a God who has none. Eternal years lie in his heart. For him, time doesn't pass, it remains. And those who are in Christ share with him all the riches of limitless time and endless years. Do you believe that? Because the more you come to see that, the more you realize you're being prepared for an adventure It's so rich and wonderful that it's beyond your imagination. You haven't seen anything yet. And eye hasn't seen or ear heard, nor has even entered the heart of man the things that God's prepared for those who love. So you know it's going to be, take the great moments. Again, I often use the greatest moments of intimacy, beauty, and adventure. Take them, and they're only hints of a greater good that you can't yet name. That's why I say, the best in your past is no longer a thing in the past. What is it? Because otherwise you're going to live with remorse and regret. But with this mindset, what I call the slingshot, take the best of your past, beauty, intimacy, adventure. Are those things in the past? Actually, they're future memories in a sort of a strange way of a memory of what's to come. It's a hint of what's to come, but the thing that I'm talking about will be so great you can't yet name it. You don't have the ability to name it. When you look back, you say, I see now. And you will be overwhelmed by that glory and goodness. Right now, you can't see it. You can't imagine it. It's beyond your ability to see and understand. I use an analogy sometimes with this idea of heaven. This kid here, again, I've shown you this before. It's when Harold Whittles hears for the first time ever after a doctor places an earpiece in his left ear. And imagine, what I love about this face, it's the best one I've ever found. I've seen lots of ones where kids hear for the first time. There's something about those eyes. You see, both, what do I see? Two emotions. What is this? A kind of a fear and a wonder. You see? And that's why I say, I add this phrase, if I'd only known. When you look back, it's going to be with fear and wonder. When you see it, when you see what he's gotten for it, you see, if I'd only known, what kind of a man would you have been? And then I use this, it's a wonderful picture though, if we stop and think about what that looks like in terms of what God's got in store for us. It's really remarkable. And so as I behold that, and as I look at this, I see that we cannot, that although the responsibilities and pressures of this world, they clamor for our attention. They are ubiquitous. They can squeeze you into our life and they can starve your soul. But what you want to be is a person who does not lose sight of the eternal and who focuses on the temporal, but you want to use the temporal for eternal gain. And that's exactly what you want to do. Don't love the things or in the things in this world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father but from the world. And the world is passing away and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God forever. So this precious present, to treasure your passing opportunities, but the best is yet to come. You haven't seen anything yet. The least of heaven is better than the greatest of earth. And you will not be disappointed. You're going to look back and say, if I'd only known, you would have used that time even more wisely. Be alive to the grace of the now. You are alive for a reason. As long as you have life and breath, you are capable and called to do something that's going to endure forever. You have the ability to do that. Do not lose heart in doing what is good, but stay with it. Don't be overwhelmed with the promises of life, but allow the promises of the next life to inform the troubles and hassles and griefs and absurdities of this life. And even there, he'll use those pains and he'll use them in a redemptive way to draw us and to his grace. Savor the blessings and joys that most people overlook. It's a very wise thing. Present opportunities. Use your time wisely and well, because the days are short. And so be wise, and with older people reflect, what would you have changed? They say, I would have reflected more. They often say, I would have risked more, and I would have done more things that would last. So again, gain wisdom from this perspective. It's to treasure the unseen. So as I draw this together, we must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no man can work. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, and especially the people of God. Use this day. It's all you've got. live this day in light of the day of the Lord that's going to come. And that's a wise way for us to live.